Morning, everybody. Sorry I'm late.
So Nat and Tanya proposed a slide change, which I was happy to do. And I started doing it this morning and discovered the slides already so heavily animated that to do it, and I decided to do a slightly different version to theirs. And then meanwhile, it's trash recycle day that had to go down, and the neighbor intercepted me at the bottom of the driveway, had to talk to them. And then I came up here and the painter showed up to finish the bathroom. We've got company coming tonight for the first time in many years. So I never got finished. So it's a little bit patchy right now. I'll fix it after we hang up. It's probably gonna take me half an hour or something or 15 minutes to get all the animation straight. But I think this is a very powerful slide set. And I had about an hour conversation with a friend of mine in Australia, Paul Hawkins, and he really was impressed with the new changes. This is a little bit different than what we've seen before. I think this is important enough that, and I think you all agreed with this, that we should go through this a second time and talk about these slides. Before we start, Nat and Tanya had sent an email asking about decision making. And I think that there's two things to this. One is the going to the criteria. I talked about this with the picking the shuttle's main engines. And I talked about this in deciding whether tourism should be a major in the business school. And I think if you stop and if decision is difficult, what I like to do, and there's a slide on it, but I'm not going to go there. I like to brainstorm the criteria, put them on a flip chart, have people vote on them, put the resultant ones on a flip chart, then take the possible decisions you could take and chart them against those criteria. What I find is that most arguments about decisions are really arguments about the criteria, which are below the surface. The other thing that I think is really important, even a deeper piece of work, is trying to understand the frame of the people involved. Most arguments are about how things have been framed. And that's what politics are about. So I'm wondering, again, why no one can understand or respond to the climate change story. And more importantly, I think it's been overtaken, at least in my mind, by the overshoot story. And climate change is a aspect of that. But CO2 is the biggest waste product. Basically, human civilization is simply consuming far faster than the biosphere can regenerate and dumping waste far faster than the biosphere can assimilate it. And that problem is not going to go away. That's in the risk management matrix context. Absolutely certain we're going to run out of fossil fuels. It's a certainty, at least I believe it is. And it's going to be catastrophic because we got like 1,000 fossil fuel workers for every human worker on Earth today. As soon as we lose those 1,000 people, you're going to have what's called a simplification, which is what people like Joseph Taylor say happens in a collapse. And so the framing of how people frame it is the core issue here. I've got to get this phone. That's the front door trigger going on and off with the painter going in and out. So anyway, comments or thoughts on what I've been talking about? This criteria piece makes sense to you?
A couple. First, apologies for being late. I was dealing with an employee issue, so my apologies. And Tanya was late because I was late. So I think the reason this came up is we were talking a little bit about to be honest, we were talking about my dating journey and how Tanya and I connected. And part of what was not working for me previously in relationships is my decision-making process was flawed. And so for me, the fix was learning to trust my intuition. I think the criteria is actually a powerful and interesting concept that I'd kind of forgotten about a little bit as well. But I think to get to the right criteria, I had to learn to trust my intuition. Um, I almost feel like this could be its own course. Honestly, I think so many people for decisions, that decision making could be its own breakout. But it's something I spend a fair amount of time thinking through, because you're right, criteria is important, but developing effective and appropriate criteria was really difficult. Like I had to go on a lot of dates to figure out, because it's not like I'm, buying a thing and I'm evaluating an other person. And so that takes some skill building. It takes some failures. So yeah, I would love, I intend to go back to those parts of the course and kind of relook at that. Because I remember we used to do the post-it process in your class, Dr. Pellerin.
Yeah.
I thought that was a highly effective, and I think you've streamlined that a little bit. So I need to add that into my.
Well, I think I've gone into a better method than that now with the other thing I described. But what I'm going to say is that this is just another variation on first principles thinking, the asking the why.
Right.
So, and I think that thinking methodology of asking why. So if you ask, why do you want to do that? I think get to these criteria, it just makes things. I was answering in the context of what I thought was a work dilemma. I was thinking of Tanya's troublesome friend, and but as far as I dated for 10 years before I remarried, and it's a story. It's a story into itself.
Yeah, but I think the challenges are somewhat related.
Yeah.
As far as decision making goes.
Yeah.
You have to understand the decision making space. Part of that's the criteria.
I think the biggest part of the relationships, any relationship, is having the shared interest and addressing them. And so what finally worked for me was looking at shared interest and who I had shared interest with, and discovering that was another country. And writing those down. You've got a lot of shared interest, you too.
Yeah.
And health and gardening and so forth. So as long as you focus on those, relationships work. The minute you don't have those, I don't think relationships can work. So Nico, with your new girlfriend, I would urge you to sit down and do a joint shared interest inventory. And that will tell you if this is going to work after the glow fades, because the glow does fade.
That's so true.
I was just about
forever, but it isn't.
I was just about to simplify the whole thing for Nat. It's very simple. Just listen to Tanya. I mean, it's very simple. You call that the first principle.
That's first principles for sure.
Actually, Charlie, what you say is so true. When my first marriage was just on the rocks, and I had said, we need to go to marriage counseling, and the marriage counselor said, I want you to go through this exercise. It was literally one of the very first things that she had us do. And it was like she had a deck of cards, and they all had, or not a deck of cards, but note cards. And they all had these things that people value. And it was a values exercise to see, did our values line up at all?
That's a version of the shared interest work. Yeah.
It is. And here's what I determined: this marriage will never work, as my ex-husband wouldn't even participate in the exercise. He wouldn't go back to marriage counseling. So that was like, that day I was like, we're getting a divorce. This will never work if you can't even participate. Yep, game over.
Yeah, Charlie, but it's also something when we talk about decision making. When we hire people, those are very serious decisions. Like, right, you bring someone into the organization, and we all know it only takes one to make a really big mess or to make really great things, right? But also on the flip side, when you hire someone, you also make a significant impact on their life, right? So I know when we always look into that, they often tell us if your gut feeling is a no at first, then it's a no. And also, and so then I looked into that. I mean, I'm no pro for that, but one of the things that I was able to read about is that intuition, that gut feeling, is actually not some supernatural weird thing. It is in a way a collection of everything that we have
That's
seen
right.
and heard and learned in life, and it
That's right.
just comes, and you perhaps cannot really in the moment decipher
Yep.
what tells you yes or no, what
I-
gives you those signals.
I think it's an unconscious integration of past experience. That's what the
Yep.
intuition is.
Yeah.
And I think also that there's as many neurons in the stomach as there are in the brain. And so gut feeling is real. But but as far as hiring, I'll share this with you. By the way, I may have interrupted you. Did you finish?
Sorry, what did you say?
I may have interrupted you. Did you finish?
Oh, no, I finished. Thank you.
So I had a problem that,
I would like to add something.
yeah, okay. Well, let me follow up on her
I'll go
comment if I
after.
could.
I'll go. Yeah, I'll go after you. I'll go
So
after you.
about hiring people. So when I was in the civil service with NASA, and you don't get to hire people very often. And when I had maybe one or two a year, something like that, because civil service doesn't change much, and half of them didn't work out. And I had a really smart guy, a Mensa person that worked for me, named Doug Broom, and I said, Doug, what's going on here? He said, here's what's happening. You are an incredibly demanding person. And in fact, a little anecdote about him. After he came to work for me, he said, I love working for you. He said, everybody says you're a son of a bitch to work for. And I said, don't you ever tell anybody you like working for me. Keep telling them I'm a son of a bitch. I want someone that wants to work for a son of a bitch. I'm not a nice guy at work. So he said the problem is that people encounter you and you're very friendly, and they don't understand the social context that you're going to have in this workplace. And everybody on that team were people who like to work in demanding environments. And I think almost without exception, they all went on to big top management jobs later on. And so he said, you've got to write down what it's like to work here. And so he made a first draft. I can send it to you guys. And it wasn't very complimentary. It was about how I demand your absolute best every day, intolerant about anything less. And so I wrote it up and edited it a little bit. And when someone was a new hire and came for an interview, I said, sit down for 15 minutes and read this document. If this is the place you want to work, come in and have the interview. If not, leave. And half the people left. And the half that stayed were all successful. So I found that writing down, especially if there are people that are looking to retire on the job at some level, my division was the wrong place to come. So excuse me, that's stupid.
I would love to hear some more about that, because I am dealing with that now. I have an employee that is not performing, and I want to treat them fairly and with respect, but I think my intuition's obviously I probably would have never hired the person. They weren't my hire. I inherited this person.
Yeah.
But my intuition is telling me they're not going to make it. So I want to make it as quickly as possible so I can get the right in.
So what I would say to the people, I was forced by my boss. I'm not sure this is a good idea. Musk does the same thing, to make a ranking of the people according to their performance. And at the end of every year, come up with a plan to change out the bottom performers. I didn't mind doing that. I didn't like being told to do it. But I'd bring someone in my office and say, look, here's the truth of the matter. you're not going to ever be truly successful in this organization, because the expectations that we have here are not something that you're going to be comfortable trying to live up to. However, there's an organization across the hall, and my little joke was, if you moved over there, you'd improve the IQ of both places. And so, so
Ouch.
that's a little inside joke about that. Didn't say that. And I said, if you went over there, you're going to be a star, and I'll help you go over there. I mean, you have some really good qualities, and in that organization, I know the head of the place, and he's not on a mission like I am. He's not. He's more like a regular guy, and I think go over there, you can help them, and I'll give you a nice recommendation to help you move. And they said thank you, and they left. So I mean, the unfortunate reality is that you're not going to ever be a real success here, because you're not 100% committed to what we're trying to do like these other people are. And so, and also I found that if you can, a big part of this was how important the value of exploring the universe astrophysically was to them. And there are people who came in and said, this is a life mission I want to adopt with you. That got a whole bunch of big points. Then the next question is, are you willing to work in a place as demanding as, do you like it? I mean, the other employees would get mad at me if I tolerated nonsense. They wanted this high bar of performance, and so that's I think it's back. All roads lead to social context for me. So go ahead, Nico.
May I
Sorry,
come in?
I wanted to respond to the hiring piece.
Yeah, no, important. I really want to share with you what's going on in my head now, because I've been learning this over a period of time about all of you. Tarinka, I'm very sorry, because I know you not that well. Okay, but getting to Nat and Tanya, I want to take that step back to appreciation. Nat, the only thing is for us, because we share this, that's why we are together on this platform. We are in a way stubborn and this and that, and we have our own ideas and so on. But the openness to ask questions and to open up yourself, that's really something that I want to appreciate. That's something that I'm learning from you, because I'm now in the same process. It's very good to go on your own. Please don't tell me I'm desperate, because I've been 11 years on my own. But now I have to make a plan. I don't, it's my choice. I don't want to go on like this. So I was considering, asking Charlie's advice to contact a community in Japan to send me a wife. And then I remembered about the gypsy girl in Poland, that gave me a coffee for free. There was a special connection between us, but it's like all over the world. There's like this wonderful person in the Philippines as well. But anyway, so then eventually this person contacted me from literally from school days, and she's a very, very calm person. She just goes with the flow and comfortable with herself, and not issues that I can pick up. But anyway, Tanya, I just want to appreciate when it comes to that, from the first moment, when you've been on this platform, I envied Nat for that. Just that is communicating so much to me in terms of in the same space, or then it's just a matter of, create the contacts and stuff like Charlie said. But what I've learned from Charlie is then not just to go to the extreme. I mean, it's if it's not to space, then it's to Japan and finding Django. And I will forever remember my short visit and communication, interaction with Django, the kind of person she is. So yeah, I must say appreciation. And when I goes to yeah, so Charlie, just take that, it's just to uh, go to the extreme. Why all these limitations and things holding you back? And then Larissa, I mean, she's just a role model for me. I can't imagine the hardship, the adversities that they've been through, and they've created this very solid relationship. I really wonder if there's anything possible that can still split them up. They've been through so much that I'm just in awe for that. So this is the kind of stuff that I've learned from you. Larissa's really like a role model, and therefore she's a very strong person. But we also became strong because of hardships, of the other side of the coin. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
So just one more little comment that might be fun about this social context back in my workplace. A guy who worked for me, that he moved up in the organization quite dramatically. His name was Ed Weiler. And he related to me a story about he'd made it a presentation to the administrator, and he was riding down the elevator with another senior manager. And the guy said, "Ed, that was a great job." And he said, "No, that was shit." And the guy said, "What do you mean that was shit?" He said, "I worked for Charlie Pellerin, and if it wasn't the best you could do, it's shit. And it wasn't the best I could do." So that was the mindset, if you can imagine that. That's good, bad, or indifferent.
I like it.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll send you all the Doug Broom description of the social context after we hang up. And,
Thank you.
And it is not flattering about me, but I think it's real. So there it is.
No. So I think the other thing that kind of popped, and I forget if it was Darinka or Larissa that mentioned this, but going back to the decision-making process, kind of where my mind went with Tanya's and my conversation, then again this morning with the comments, was how does effective decision-making relate to the 4 dimensions, right? We've talked a lot about intuition, and we've talked about in other circumstances how getting others to make decisions, you try to meet them at their dimension, right? So if you've got a blue person, you try to show them the big sky, but yeah, so I guess to try to get a coherent thought out here, for me, engaging my intuition was important for making more effective decisions. I'm curious if there's places where someone engaging their logical sense leads them to better decisions, or if it really is like trying to engage all 4 components: your emotional, your logical, your intuitive, and your sensed.
Well, for me, my intuitive processor is my strong suit by all 4, and it's very fast. It's just not as accurate as going through the logical steps. I may have told you this story, but I had a deputy that worked for me. He actually was a school, by coincidence, he was a schoolmate in graduate school as well. I thought he was a better physics student than I was, but on the job, I was much more effective because I could somehow, with my intuition, I could unravel complicated things really quickly. And I'd have a staff meeting, and he would say, how did you decide that? And I was like, it's obvious. How could you not see it? I mean, and he'd say, well, can you explain it step by step? And I respected this guy so much. His name was George Newton, that I would do this for him. And so every morning I had a 15-minute meeting with the staff. And I would say, here's how I got there. I go A, B, C, D, E, go through about 8 steps. Well, what happened is at the end of the 8th step, it was always a little different. So the intuition was fast, but not precise. So I learned that, it's very easy for people. Another word for intuition, I think, is imagination. And we build the structures that we make decisions on with lenses that our imaginations create. That's why humans aren't rational. So I think that that's a social context thing again. In groups, you tend to form this common thing. I was reading a thing about why people can't accept this overshoot story, and the guy had a quote from Abraham Lincoln that had two fighting congressmen in a room. I think it's in next week's newsletter. And he said to them, "Can't you understand that two people can have totally different views and both be right?" And what he's talking about from your frame of reference, it's right. So the Republicans and Democrats, they're arguing and they're both sure they're right, and they're both called it an imaginary frame of reference. And the more they interact together, the stronger and the more refined that frame of reference becomes, and the more it looks like God's truth. So I think I keep thinking about your difficulty, Tanya, and the guy lives in a different frame of reference is the issue. And so you're not going to ever agree with him until you, and I think it's maybe more useful to acknowledge a different frame of reference is true for them and try to understand that. There's a book called Don't Think of an Elephant about this in politics. It's about political parties. And so they get this frame of reference, and then when they find a whole lot of people that agree with it, and that's why they hang out together in caucuses, they call them, on the Hill, and reinforce this. And when they all believe in the same thing, another name for this is groupthink, that's where it goes. So you're not going to make any progress making them wrong, because their frame of reference is what's informing their rationale. So now that's a short version of what I think about the intuition versus the logic. So George was very good, very clean, logical thinker, maybe better than me, but he wasn't fast enough for the changing environment in a big, complex organization like a political part of the government. It's fast. I mean, it's daily. So an intuitive processor has the speed advantage, and all the top management had good intuitive processors, because otherwise you couldn't keep up. And the logical deciding is more precise, but there isn't sometimes time for it. That's kind of my take on it, on deciding.
As
By
you
the way, you're
know,
spending enough time on this, you're going to save me from my embarrassment with the workshop slides that don't work.
now just a comment on the both sides are right. It doesn't have to be a yes or no. As you know, I've studied the mindset development of Nelson Mandela, and that is one of the outstanding characteristics. That it was like there's like so many cases as examples where there was a choice, and then he said, "But what about both?" You know, he was always going for inclusiveness, and then how everybody on both sides should give in to each other and find consensus. It's amazing if you follow the track, you know, how that's being applied in difficult situations, even with him and de Klerk, with their negotiations. And then sometimes, yeah, so I can go on about this. He really made a strong stand on this to be inclusive. It's seldom the one is right and the other one wrong. It's about how to find a mutual ground.
On your feet. By the way, I'm already standing. Okay, should we? Any more comments or questions?
No.
Shall we go back to the slides or
I just
everybody
wanted
got closure here?
I just wanted to just go back and discuss with Nat about the decision making and what you were talking about really removing someone and dealing with that. Very often what HR people will tell you is that when there's someone who is not performing, once the relationship ends, actually that person benefits immensely. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not an easy thing in the moment,
Right.
but if it's a poor relationship that is not going anywhere and that person is getting stressed and not progressing in their career and they're not able to ending it in the long run, it might actually be helpful. And that's something that HR people tell the managers who are in a position to end those relationships, because it's not an easy thing. Nobody goes into management with a goal of firing people, right? You go to make big things and promote people, and right, like firing is nowhere on the list.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you end up with that.
That's good. I think that's absolutely right. And I think if you make it a social context issue, not that you're bad. So that's what I basically made it. I said, this is a context you're not going to flourish in, and this is why.
Yeah.
And you're a good person, so you don't have to give anybody a bad rating. Just encourage them to move to a context that suits them better. Yeah. And in fact, I think most of them would regard themselves as successful when they move to a less demanding environment. I always thought of my job at NASA like I was running my own company back then. I never took the mindset of a government worker. I just didn't think it made sense. So the performance, what I used to tell my staff was, I want you to go get in your car and go drive outside the Beltway until you find a house with an automobile that's worth less than my bicycle. And then go in there and ask to have dinner with these people and tell them what you did today and tell them what you got paid and ask them if they got good value for their money. That's the test.
Right.
And I believe that's a reasonable test. And that's the kind of thing I talk to them about. And I don't think most people wanted to even think about that experiment. I think you could use it in any job.
Right.
If you could explain to a shareholder of a company, or this is what you did, this is what you got paid, did they get their money's worth? That's not a common mindset. I don't think anything else succeeds in the long run. Good comments. Thank you all.
Yeah, this has been a great discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, let's this is the same slide I showed before, but I think this is an interesting slide to think about framing anything back in the customer's perspective. And I think, and for example, in your business, Nat, you or Tanya's, either one, or Dorinka's, it's interesting to think about what would a customer think about it. And so this slide is about trying to put customer needs, things that I think most people would want, and then showing that we're addressing these things. So this all got energized by someone comparing my work with other leadership training. And I said, my work is not training. Training normally infers improving skills. And in fact, I think leadership training is an oxymoron. It doesn't make any sense. You don't learn it with training. You learn it by shifting mindsets and managing social context. So benchmarking team performance, and this is the team benchmarking curve. Again, in terms of getting people to buy into doing this work, a lot of people were skeptical because of past experiences. Their intuition said this isn't going to work because all their past experience was these trainings they went to didn't do anything other than entertain them. And so to say, would you just like to benchmark your team's performance? I found almost every manager wanted to do that. Enhance performance and then make progress that's discernible, reliable. By reliable, I mean it's sustained and with some noise in it gets better, and tracking with real data. Improve your competitive advantage. I don't know a single company that doesn't want to do that. I mean, that's the lifeblood, isn't it, of existence? And then manage your state of being. And I think everybody concerns themselves with stress and the effects on their health. The US is in a downward trend of life expectancy now, as an aside. So this was a new slide, I think, since you guys saw. And what is this whole thing about? So I thought in one sentence, it's a results and data-driven suite of processes that manage human-induced social context fields. Let's unpack this. Results-driven enhances team behaviors that strongly correlate with positive business results. So I think the difference between this and, say, leadership training is about learning a method. This is about directly addressing what any enterprise should be concerned most about, which is, are you getting results or not? And at the end of the day, that's a kind of a first principle. It's not about leadership, it's about results. In data-driven, the behaviors are periodically, quarterly or monthly, measured against standards and benchmarked. So I don't think anybody else does this. And so that's the data-driven part of it. The processes, well, we got the online behavior measurement tools with benchmarking, but there's something much more important about these. And that is that repetition is, I believe, required for any behavioral change. And this provides rapid, efficient repetition. People can answer 10 questions in about 15 minutes, process the actions in about an hour later. This is fast enough that you can do this often. So I think that's the most powerful single process. The workshops, which are experiential, and I think what's important is they process a presenting dilemma. So we do this with a team. They come into the room with a problem, and they walk out 2 days later with a new set of options to resolve it. By the way, the workshop also has another benefit. It creates a common vocabulary. And I should have put the book in here. I left the book out. So anyway, so the context shifting worksheet, I don't know any way you can get a totally different perspective on a problem that you framed as insolvable in an hour, except this. And finally, AMBR, attention, mindset, behavior, results. So I think this is a very nice little story. Social context feels, and this is what I was talking about, people's perception. These context feels create filters through which we see the world. And again, that's what, I mean, it's easiest to see in politics, but it's true, I think, in everything. So the financial world has a lens that looks at GDP growth, balance of payments, this kind of thing, and ignores everything else. The environmental movement looks at the ecosystem and ignores the fact that we need zombie fossil fuel workers to have anything like the life we live, and changing that dramatically is not simple. And so what's happening here is what's called groupthink, and I think that you start with a political party that becomes more and more extreme as people sort of grind in on these core beliefs and become more and more invested in them. And then confirmation bias. This is probably the biggest single limitation. Humans are not objective. The way we work is we build these frames, we build them socially. And you think about this, you've got them with anybody that you interact with or hang out with. And in that frame, you look for evidence to reinforce it and make it right. And you typically resist information that's contrary. And it causes planes to crash. It causes mirrors to be flawed. It's just a common human condition. And the social context field affects these frames. So when you have a social context field full of anger and hatred, that makes a certain kind of frame. When you have one full of appreciation and shared interest, it makes a different framing. So that's how powerful this work is with the behaviors. Then finally, social context fields control behaviors, and we reinforce this with shared storylines. Remember, storylines aren't the truth, but they're the truth for each of us. So these social context fields are glue that drive how we see the world, not just how we act in the world, but how we see it. So this is why I think it's important to measure and manage these things. Comments, thoughts?
Say that again.
I was like, I feel like I need to start over.
With work, or where's this coming from?
Like there's just, it's so in some ways it's elegant and simple, but there's a lot of richness to each one of these kind of
Yeah,
points.
there is.
It's just like, oh man.
I think that's the most interesting part of this. It's got both at once. It's got simplicity at some level, but as you bore into it. By the way, when I used to allow questions in workshops, I loved the questions because it let me show off how rich the thing really was when people asked second and third. You know, we always have a thing about making a briefing. What level of question can you answer? The first level or second level or third level question? I could go into any level, so I love doing that. But Tanya, you're exactly right. It's on the one hand, it's incredibly simple. On the other hand, it's also simultaneously very deep. And you can dig in, you can look at it superficially, you can dig into it. So, but this is as simple a description as I've been able to make of what it is. It is not training.
Yeah. I like to think of the yo-yoing because I'll sometimes get lost in the details. And so, because that's not my native area for processing, I like to be high level, but due to my work, I have to drop into the detail. And so I have remind myself I have to yo-yo back out the big picture and then prepare myself to go back down in it and do everything I can not to get lost in the details. So this is the top level, which is why I was kind of getting lost in all the detail because I was seeing all the potentials and connections and questions and just, you know, there's just a lot. So this is super, super helpful for me.
I could talk through it just one more time. I think it's important to be results oriented, and most things aren't. Again, two different people characterized what I did in the last week as leadership training, and that's not about results. That's about a process. And again, I don't think it even works. And the second is having data. There's a expression attributed to Jack Welch, who turns out to be kind of a jerk, but he was the CEO of GE for a long time. And his favorite expression was, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I think there's a lot to that. If you can't measure something. And so that was sort of my early business partner was from GE and was worshipped at the altar of this guy. And so he would always press about, can we measure something? And I thought, yeah, we can measure the behaviors. And I think back to first principles, behaviors are the driver. Behaviors are everything. I love this expression from Emerson. What you do speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you say. So managing behaviors and understand the behavior driven by social context fields And these come from humans because we're tribal. And because I think that the most likely explanation for how we extincted the Neanderthals after we had sex with them and they were bigger and stronger and smarter was we were more socially adept. We had found a better arrowhead. We talked to each other about it. I remember taking a tour in Spain where there was a prehistoric site and there was some symbols on a rock that people translated to mean there's pretty ladies in the next tribe, go have sex with some of them so we can spread the genes around. So this idea of social stuff is very deep in our DNA. Goes back 2 or 3 million years. And I think to acknowledge and recognize that is a massive force in the human system, and the fact that social context is how that manifests, and the idea of social context fields. And I take license for inventing a social context field because magnetic and gravity fields, for example, are also mathematical abstractions. They're not real. So this is an abstraction that gives you something to put a handle on, something like magnetic fields or gravity fields, for something otherwise no one has any way to explain. So, and I think this is the best one-page description of what the thing is that I can think of. And it's really a potent idea. It's not
I
training.
apply some of it in my context. Can I go ahead?
Sure.
Yeah. Honestly, if I allow reality to speak to me in my context, I would probably be declared mental, insane, or out of contact with reality. It just doesn't make sense to so many people around me. My situation, and mostly it can be seen as failure after failure after failure. It's almost like you know, the SpaceX rockets going, but all exploding before they get into orbit. It's I'm very, very much aware of it, that I have created an exceptional challenge for me because it's going against the grain, it's going against the tide, it is against the culture, etc., to drive this message. And yet I do believe in it with my whole heart, and I get a lot of energy. It's not that I'm depressed or anything, but it is the most amazing journey. And all I want to say is it's
Oh,
you
how does
know,
that
the
how does that tie
tension
in?
mindset.
Nico, how's that tie into this slide in your mind? We're talking about
Well,
this
the
slide.
social context, creating a social context, you know, within a bigger social context, and then it doesn't make sense. If this was in a corporate environment, they would have fired me. Luckily, at this stage, nobody's paying me, you know. But if I put a project on the table, I have to go and raise funds. It's constantly raising funds, and it constantly feels like failure because, you know, most of it is not accepted, and I don't get the success somewhere where I can scale, for instance, which is so needed at this stage with the prototype that I've established. And there's so much good things coming in. I mean, Larissa can talk about this forever because she's really throwing in it a lot. But it's all over the place. So I need this attention, mindset, behavior, results constantly. And many times you just feel lost, you know, and you have to go back and find the road again. So all I want to say, this is very relevant, applicable, and a constant challenge.
So
Absolutely.
see if I can play this back. So you have created a local social context to do something that you regard as very valuable. but it's a problem fitting it into the larger social context of the world you live in. Is that a good summary?
It is. Yeah, it is. It is. I would say there's enough for me to boast about, to feel good about. You know, last night I did a podcast with a well-known podcaster in the US, Yvette Taylor Hagus, and it was her second podcast. She couldn't get enough. There's enough positive feedback, but it's from abroad. It's from abroad. Here, the recognition comes from my most important clients, but they don't have money. You know, and then the business world and the religious institutions and government and so on, they all on their own mission, and yeah.
So it sounds to me
it's
like you do well when it's an abstraction, but run aground when it hits reality. Is that
yeah, something like that. It makes sense.
so you've got a social context that you're advocating and promulgating, and it works in an academic sphere, an abstract sphere, a contextual sphere, but maybe when it gets to be around jobs and employment and things like that, that's when it runs aground.
It makes absolutely sense for the Black youth and the educators and people close to them.
Yeah.
I got fantastic feedback from them. But I mean, in order to really make this work, I need to scale. I need to appoint staff members. Currently, I'm just running around trying to do everything, going crazy.
Well,
You know, and then it feels like, but what am I doing wrong? You know, I missed something.
I think the question is, what is the frame the 50-year-old white male looks at what you do with? The frame of perception is probably very different, you know? And so the question is, how do you communicate with that framing? And that's not an easy question. You got to find a way to make something in it for them. And so if I understand what you want to do, it doesn't help the prototypical 50-year-old white male who's probably got more money and power than the people you're trying to help.
That's probably true. Can I try?
Please. Yeah, please.
As I'm listening to you, Nico, I'm like, oh, this is a green who has 100% as a green, right? I see this, like you see the social importance of this, right? For society, you understand this clearly and you're 100% committed. Otherwise you would not continue to do this. But I think you're right, Charlie, it is working the 4D process here because there's some unfortunate realities that, right, that some people in a different social context, just this is not resonating for, right? And so that 4D process is so important for the folks that do have the finances and the ability to help you scale this. But yeah, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is such a green. I'm sorry.
It is. It is totally. It's
well, I think
blue.
the world should be green, isn't it?
It's blue applied to green's what it is.
Yeah. But I would just say work that process of thinking about the other social context for those who do maybe hear and see something different to be able to help you move this thing along.
As soon as you get to that, you'll make some progress and not before, right?
Seems like an interesting use case.
I know.
You know this expression, walk a mile in their shoes before you say more. The benefit is, first, you'll be a mile away, they can't hit you. And second, you'll have their shoes.
Love it.
Well, thank you all. You've saved me the embarrassment of the screwed up slides I've got time to fix now. We never got there. So I will make that repair.
I like your new addition, Charlie. That was really great. Yeah, it's good, and it's kind of fun to see this iteration process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But, and I'll also send you Doug Broom's description of the culture of the organization.
Yeah.
Charlie, I'm going to send you an email, just kind of, I'm getting to a point where this time is not going to work for me any longer. And so also just kind of wanting to understand, are we sunsetting this meeting, or are we continuing this?
My plan is we have yet to get back to the lessons learned from other countries' work. So I see this as continuing, although this coming Tuesday, I've got, I'm taking my guests to the airport in the morning, so I won't be available this coming Tuesday, but I see this as continuing as long as anybody wants to do it. And the time is completely changeable as far as I'm concerned. Is there a better time for you?
The weekend.
Weekend works for me. Dorinka? Nico?
I mean, it depends on when on the weekend.
Yeah, I can send you kind of my thoughts, Charlie,
Yeah,
and
good.
if
Okay.
it's just a one-person deal, you know.
We already have another Saturday meeting that people reliably can make. We could do this. Larissa, Saturdays easier, harder for you probably than weekdays.
That's okay. I can make it from 10
Okay.
to from the hours that standing right now on Saturdays. I can still make it.
Okay. Well, we'd like to have you continue with us, so let's see what we can do.
I just wanted to understand how much more of the curriculum we have.
Well,
Because
I saw this just sort of ongoing indefinitely.
Yeah, I will have to renegotiate my agreement because I cannot.
No, it's completely voluntary to come to these, as long as there's sufficient interest. I'm happy to do this as it serves you folks.